I rise today in the strongest terms to oppose the nomination of Russell Vought to serve as Director of the Office of Management and Budget. And I do so not just for his poor performance and lack of transparency before the Senate Budget Committee during his confirmation hearing, but because of his truly dangerous and damaging vision for the future of our country. I want to be very clear. If Russell Vought is confirmed to lead the Office of Management and Budget, it will be working families in America that pay the price. If he's confirmed, he'll work to slash the social safety net, threaten Medicaid and SNAP benefits, and to balance the budget on the backs of our most vulnerable neighbors, all in service of cutting taxes for billionaires and for large corporations. Now, let me start this morning by saying that if we were hoping for some sort of clarity or some commitment, some reassurance from Russell Vought during his confirmation process, we certainly weren't given much to work with. During the confirmation hearing, and yes, I'm a member of the Budget Committee, at best, he was non-responsive to our questions and inquiries. In fact, he was actually pretty evasive when asked some of the more pointed questions. And as I reflected on his testimony, I observed that it was what he didn't say that spoke volumes. It told us everything that we needed to know about the dangers of reinstating him to this hugely important and consequential position. Other Trump nominees, right, other confirmation hearings and other committees that I've been a part of, at a minimum, they've committed, or at least they uttered the words that they would respect the Constitution and abide by the law. That should be the bare minimum for someone seeking Senate confirmation for any position that is to serve the American people. That's the minimum. But Mr. Vought couldn't even do that. He refused to commit to following the law as it pertains to implementing the spending plans and priorities established by Congress, including us, colleagues. We are the United States Senate. Why would he refuse to commit to that fundamental premise? Because if he were to do that, he'd be lying under oath. He made it abundantly clear that as director of OMB, he has every intention of ignoring the laws passed by Congress, including the spending plans. He's been very explicit about that. Now, if this was, any other nominee by any other president, and he refused to make such a commitment, we might be left wondering about what his true priorities are, what his true agenda is. But for better and for worse, Russell Vought has already shown us exactly what he intends to do. We don't need to deal in hypothetical scenarios when it comes to him. For starters, he has served as head of the Office of Management Budget before. You'll recall during the first Trump administration. In that time, in that capacity, on multiple occasions, he illegally froze congressional appropriated funds and withheld taxpayer dollars in order to obey President Trump's political demands. And even today, Russell Vought has already restarted this effort, as unlawful as it is. Restarted this effort even though he hasn't even yet been confirmed by the Senate. He's already played a central role in OMB's attempt to withhold funding these last couple of weeks. Funding for programs including Head Start that so many families across the country rely on. Withhold funding for job assistance programs for our veterans. Yes, veterans. The very women and men that we honor for their willingness to serve, their willingness to pay the ultimate sacrifice on behalf of our country, who need our assistance when they return home from service. That's who he's going after? He's withheld funds for countless other programs that working families across the country rely on. His actions in these last couple of weeks have plunged not just the federal government, but frankly, the country and our financial markets into chaos and confusion. And like I said, he hasn't even been confirmed yet. And this is what's already happening. But colleagues, if these early signals weren't enough for you to grasp what he's capable of, what he is hell-bent on doing, if you're wondering what else he may have in mind and in store for the OMB, I guess you're in luck, because he literally wrote a playbook for what he intends to do. I invite you all, and folks watching at home, if you haven't done so already, go to project2025.org. And as you call up this report, you call up this playbook, you'll call up this agenda, you'll see that he is one of the key authors. And while President Trump claims he hasn't had a chance to review his budget director's vision for the administration, and while many members of this body might have been a little too busy these last several months to read it for themselves, let me try to help by giving you just a very, very brief summary, some of the key points. Because when you boil it down, the main goals of Project 2025, as the authors, including Mr. Vought, have expressed, are this. Number one, give the office of the President of the United States unprecedented power. And two, to use that power to slash the rest of government in order to pay for tax cuts for billionaires and large corporations. It's that simple. That's their goal. That's their objective. That's their agenda. They want an unchecked president to gut investments that Congress directs to help working families in order to give even bigger tax breaks for big corporations and billionaires. Billionaires, by the way, just like the ones he surrounded himself with in his inauguration. It's not a secret. It's not a veiled attempt. It's blatant. It's out in the open. They are literally working to steal from the poor to give more to the rich. That's the Trump agenda. And that's all that Russell Vought is working towards. But again, colleagues, don't just take my word for it. Let's look at the record. Now, it's easy to chalk up these first couple of weeks of the second Trump administration just to chaos. That's how they operate. We've known this. We've seen it coming. Well, it certainly has been chaotic. Some of that chaos may be due to incompetence. I think a lot has been very, very intentional, and clearly a lot of it due to an utter lack of empathy. But what is intentional is chaos by design. You've heard these terms. They're proud of it. Flood the zone. Traumatize federal workers. Yes, they've said it. I'll come back to that in a couple of minutes. But they've sought distractions from the scale of what they're trying to do. So through it all, to my colleagues and to the nation, I urge us all to keep our eyes on the ball. See the Trump administration exactly for what it is and who they are. To understand this administration, you simply have to understand their single biggest objective. Huge handouts to the largest corporations and the wealthiest Americans. President Trump is trying to one-up his first term when his signature legislative accomplishment wasn't infrastructure improvements, as much as he tried to talk about that. It wasn't increasing access to health care or quality of health care. In fact, they worked so hard to try to take it away. The single biggest accomplishment of President Trump's first administration was record deficits brought to you by record tax breaks for the wealthy, and by cutting the corporate tax rate by 14%, from 35% down to 21%. That's right, he was giving huge tax breaks to corporations to increase their profit margins. And it's not that they weren't making money, they were making plenty of money. Who wasn't making plenty of money is the workers who made those profits possible. The wage growth wasn't what American workers deserved it to be. Now, that was the first Trump administration. We've just begun the second Trump administration, where you would think that maybe, just maybe, they'd work hard on making good on their campaign theme or campaign pledge, whatever you want to call it, of putting, quote, America first. I'd love to see it. They could put America first if they chose to invest in our education system and help educate and train our future workforce in ways that would grow our economy in the years and decades ahead. Or they could put America first by tackling the high cost of housing and grocery prices. But no, that's not what they're doing. They're right back to focusing on tax breaks for corporations by hundreds of billions of dollars. It's the only thing that President Trump's about, frankly. Look at his record, look at his life. He wants to make life even easier for himself, for his family, for his wealthy friends, for the top, not just the 1%, the top 0.1% of America. But you can't just give these tax breaks away for free. You've got to pay for them somehow. Somebody's got to fund them. So in order to pay for these tax breaks, the administration is determined to cut as much spending from our communities and our most vulnerable as they can. Like I said, they're not even hiding it anymore. On the campaign trail, President Trump enjoyed playing dress-up at McDonald's and staging photo ops with garbage trucks. But on day one of his administration, who did he surround himself with? Not a fast food worker, not a sanitation worker, not an auto worker who he claimed to reach out to in recent years, or a steel worker as much as he wants to champion blue-collar workers in the Midwest. No, he chose to surround himself by the richest men in the country, some of the richest men in the world. Remember his inauguration? They were right there in the front row. You recognize the names: Zuckerberg, Bezos, Musk. To hardworking Americans who may have voted for him in November, I'm sorry to tell you, he used you. He used you for your votes. He got what he needed from you, and now he and Russell Vought are about to make you pay. For an idea of what the next 4 years with Russell Vought and Donald Trump in charge will mean, let's review again these last couple of weeks. It's been decision after decision after decision following Russell Vought and Project 2025's playbook. Empower the president, and then enrich themselves and their wealthy friends. Now, we've long known that this president could care less about the guardrails put in place in our Constitution. Since when has he cared about what's constitutional or not? But after the Supreme Court granted him blanket immunity, he's using his newfound powers to eliminate any opposition or dissent around him. From day one in this second administration, President Trump has used his powers to seek retribution against anyone he perceives as a political enemy. And he sought to undermine and threaten any potential opposition. On day one, he issued 1,500 pardons for the January 6th rioters, if you want to call them that. Insurrectionists is what I call them. Folks who desecrated this United States Capitol, who attacked law enforcement officers in an attempt to overthrow an election. The last couple of weeks, they've begun to investigate and fire professional career prosecutors at the Department of Justice who did their duty when asked to investigate the crimes committed on January 6th of 2021. Prosecutors who were required, when assigned to, required to investigate insurrection, sedition, violence against law enforcement personnel. Serious crimes, folks. Serious crimes. President Trump's team even sent out a survey to members of the FBI regarding their involvement in January 6th investigations. Now, just this week, CNN reported, and I'll quote, FBI turns over details of 5,000 employees who worked on January 6 cases to the Trump Justice Department as agents sue. end quote. And President Trump's illegally fired 18 inspectors general and over a dozen career prosecutors from the special counsel's office who worked under Jack Smith to investigate and prosecute criminal actions from his first term in office. Still early in the second administration, but the message is already crystal clear. President Trump will threaten anyone who might show a willingness to hold him accountable for his actions. It's the same reason why he's not just firing folks, but he's installing loyalists at the Department of Justice, especially at the FBI, so that no one will dare tell him no. Now, how do we know these are loyalists? The newly sworn-in Attorney General of the United States has served as President Trump's personal attorney. Well, people say when there's a conflict there, just delegate it to the Deputy Attorney General. So who might that be? Oh, surprise, surprise, another former personal attorney. Where will the conflicts end? But of course, there's still dedicated public servants out there willing to do what's right, even if that means standing up to Trump. But it is indeed getting harder and harder. Now, earlier this week, the New York Times reported that the head of the FBI's New York office wrote to his colleagues and vowed to dig in. That's what he wrote, quote, dig in the face of this assault, not just on law enforcement personnel, but justice. He wrote, quote, today we find ourselves in the middle of a battle of our own. As good people are being walked out of the FBI and others are being targeted because they did their jobs in accordance with the law and FBI policy, end quote. That's what's happening. Retribution for folks who were doing their job simply because President Trump doesn't like it, fears the consequences and accountability. Even if it was just at the FBI, even if it was just the Department of Justice, it'd be cause for alarm. But a similar trend is happening across departments and agencies not involved in our nation's law enforcement. When President Nixon fired just a fraction of these numbers, it was called the Saturday Night Massacre. And it led to his resignation. In comparison, I can't help but note that what President Trump is doing is not a Saturday Night Massacre. It was a January massacre. And as astonished as I am at what President Trump is trying to do, I'm equally astonished at Senate Republicans who are standing by and watching it happen, letting it happen, letting it unfold as if you have no choice, as if you have no power. They're unlike their Republican predecessors who had the courage and the moral compass to recognize the harm that a president could do to the country and to tell President Nixon that enough was enough. The Trump administration is hoping to force out thousands of experienced career federal workers who have served both Democratic and Republican administrations so that he can replace them with people whose only qualification is blind loyalty. We've heard about the loyalty tests, right, that he required of folks who wanted to be considered for appointments. President Trump is attempting to twist the United States Code to redefine what non-political career workers are, to give him even more power to fire and torment our federal government workforce. One of the ways he's initiated this effort is by trying to offer a buyout or a severance to nearly all federal workers, hoping that non-loyalists would choose to leave rather than stay and be tormented. He's doing this, by the way, with absolutely no authority to do so. I focus on this point because it truly hits home for us in California. For federal firefighters who have spent the first month of this year working 24-hour shifts, battling life-threatening fires in Los Angeles County. They returned home, not just federal firefighters from California, but from a number of states. They returned home to find a message from President Trump. Now, you'd think after weeks of 24-hour shifts fighting these life-threatening wildfires that they'd come home to a thank you message from the president of their country. That wasn't the case. The message they came home to was a request for their resignation. How outrageous, how insulting, how offensive. So much so that I think it's worth repeating just a couple of the messages that I received from federal firefighters who reached out after these buyout offers went out. The first, and I quote, "It's hard to put into words just how disrespectful this feels to any civil servant, but especially to someone who's given so much, sacrificing precious time away from family, risking everything for the greater good." Another reads, quote, "Today I returned home after a 2-week fire assignment in California. A slew of executive orders over this last week have put myself and a lot of others on edge. I am worried for my livelihood and my future. A purge of federal wildland firefighters will have catastrophic outcomes. Our fire seasons are only getting longer. Neighbors continue to expand well into wild landscapes. We cannot control when a fire will choose to wreak havoc on a community, but we will show up. We want to show up." Can't help but see it the way they see it. This is a slap in the face to federal firefighters. And it's a gut punch to the confidence and the pride that so many dedicated federal workers have in the job that they do. But I'll remind us again that that's exactly what Russell Vought wants. He has said, and now I will quote him, quote, "We want the bureaucrats to be traumatically affected. When they wake up in the morning, we want them to not go to work because they are increasingly viewed as the villains. And, quote, we want to put them in trauma. Mr. President, let me repeat that last sentence. We want to put them in trauma. This is Russell Vought on behalf of President Trump speaking. We want to put them in trauma. Let that sink in. What kind of person says that about the people that they're preparing to work with and about the workers who they will be responsible for? Quote, we want to put them in trauma. What kind of person wants to inflict trauma on anybody else? Is that really the kind of person you put in charge of the Office of Management and Budget, the nerve center of our federal government? Now, clearly, in Russell Vought and Donald Trump's government, you're not rewarded for your love of country and service to country or for standing up for the Constitution. In fact, you're punished and you will be made to suffer. And by purging the federal government to make way for loyalists, the Trump administration is trying to further protect a reckless president from any accountability for his actions. President Trump's goal remains clear. He wants to destroy the founding principles of our country. He wants to eliminate the separation of powers, the checks and balances enshrined in our Constitution, and to strip Congress, yes, one of the three co-equal branches of government, of its power. That's not an exaggeration. Congress, particularly those involved with the appropriations process, know and respect the power of the purse. Congress, of course, has the power to create laws. And Congress has an important power to conduct meaningful oversight, to serve as a check on a presidency and an administration, just as the founding fathers intended. After all, the United States was created fleeing a dictatorship. We chose better, a democracy where the power lies in the people and the Congress, representatives of the people, and between the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary, checks and balances. Let's not let power become overly concentrated. Well, despite President Trump's attempts and Russell Vought's enabling of further concentration of power, no matter what President Trump wants to believe, Congress, the president, and the courts are co-equal branches of government. Yet at the start of the president's second term, once again, we've also received calls from officials in our nation's health agencies because they've had to abruptly cancel meetings. Now, with every new administration, we might expect a temporary pause on some external communication, right? There's often some legitimate transition activity. So if there's a pause or a momentary stop to social media communications, Facebook and Twitter maybe, that's one thing. But to deny Congress and the American people important information on public health, that is truly dangerous. But sadly, again, it seems that our Republican colleagues are simply unwilling to exercise their constitutional authority. Mr. President, I'm 51. Now, that may not be considered old by Senate standards, but I am old enough to remember when Republicans used to be concerned about presidential overreach. And it wasn't that long ago, like in 2017, when then Attorney General Jeff Sessions called former President Obama a, quote, emperor for his use of executive actions. Jeff Sessions, former member of this body, as Attorney General, using the word emperor in describing President Obama's use of executive actions. Or when former Speaker Paul Ryan referred to President Obama's executive orders on gun safety as, quote, a dangerous level of executive overreach, end quote. Republican leader in the House, Speaker at the time, saying it was executive overreach. It wasn't that long ago. And so I can't help but ask, what's changed? What's changed? Just 8 years later, in 2025, the Republican Party is clearly the party of Donald Trump. And with more power in the hands of the president to gut the federal government, are Republicans willing to serve as accomplices in selling out hardworking Americans in order to pay for those big tax breaks for billionaires and large corporations? That's the question. Now let's take a minute to look at who's running point for Donald Trump these days. Now, before he was sworn in for his second term as president, Trump happily handed over the keys to the government to the richest man in the world. Elon Musk paid nearly $300 million to help elect Donald Trump. And now that wager is paying off in spades. The richest president in history is now allowing the richest man in the world to find ways to cut funding from the American people. And they will lie to your face when they claim they're returning power to the people. Because if you were to ask which people, they certainly don't mean average, everyday, hardworking Americans. They're putting power and wealth further and further into the billionaire class. That's right. Trump has now handed shadow President Elon Musk control of your Social Security payments, your Medicare benefits and Medicaid benefits, the government programs that you paid into to help you in retirement, the retirement that you earned. That's all at risk now. And now Elon Musk has access to the sensitive data for hundreds of millions of Americans. He has your bank account information. He has your tax data. He has your Social Security number. He has your home address. To be clear, no law has passed to create this so-called Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE. And no law was passed, certainly, to give it any authority to make spending decisions, to shut down programs or ignore federal law. So we should all be concerned as Musk gives recent college graduates who now work for him full reign over treasuries, servers, and payment programs. If Treasury payments were ever intentionally or even unintentionally stopped, it could paralyze our economy. And it would stop people's Social Security benefits. Now, most people that I know truly rely on their Social Security to get by. So let's be clear, for Donald Trump and Elon Musk, this has never really been about government efficiency. It's about a government takeover to steal from the American people and further enrich themselves and their friends. It's the very same reason, by the way, that they're attacking USAID, illegally dismantling an agency that Congress created, working to end humanitarian assistance. Dictators around the world are celebrating. China opening its arms as Trump forces our allies to look somewhere else for partnership and support. Colleagues, USAID was created by Congress, has been annually invested in by Congress, including your votes. President Trump, Russell Vought's philosophies, who cares what they did? We're going to do what we want. They keep telling us over and over and over again. We're standing by, letting him do it. Now we hear that the Department of Education might be in Elon Musk's crosshairs next, with Donald Trump promising to abolish the department as a whole. Think about that, threatening support for millions of our students and further holding back a generation of children who have already suffered interruptions through a pandemic and who can't afford more instability. It all begs the question, who's really in control here? Who's calling the shots? Is it Donald Trump? Or is it Elon Musk? Well, today, I say to you that to working families, it doesn't matter. Neither one of them is looking out for them. And again, this is exactly what Russell Vought has envisioned. Billionaires cutting support for American families to make room for even more benefits for the rich. And his fingerprints are already all over Donald Trump's earliest steps to cut funding. Now, as I mentioned, even before he was confirmed, and he's still not confirmed, Vought had a hand in a constitutional crisis just last week, when President Trump issued a government-wide funding freeze. He hoped to withhold hundreds of billions of dollars from social safety net programs that Americans have paid into, all to lay the groundwork for his billionaire tax cuts. These federal programs might not mean much to the wealthiest people in the country, but they mean a lot to hardworking families across the country. In California alone, state agencies and local governments were blocked from accessing Medicaid and housing assistance grant portals. The director of a grant-funded program in the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office supporting victims of violent crime. Isn't that who we're trying to look out for? The local prosecutors working to protect victims of violent crime were concerned about the future of their work because federal funding had been frozen. Who knew for how long? Funding for research on cures for childhood cancer was threatened. Colleagues, childhood cancer. We're trying to find a cure, not freeze them out of hope. Local commuter rails officials in Sonoma raised concerns about their ability to continue to service the community if outstanding federal funding was frozen. This is the kind of service that people rely on to get to work, keep our economy going. Funding freezes making it difficult to do that. The city of Vacaville was worried about potential impacts to their housing authority and vouchers. Head Start grantees were frozen out of the federal payment management systems. Health centers in San Francisco met to assess their ability to provide services if grant funding and Medicare reimbursements were frozen. The Oakland Fire Department raised alarm bells about having to cut staff if an outstanding FEMA grant to support pay for 35 firefighters was paused. Northern California, Central California has seen what fires can have done to Southern California. They don't want the same. Yet we're going to jeopardize firefighter staffing? Really? Not to mention, President Trump is still holding up hundreds of millions of dollars that were promised for key infrastructure projects in California. And communities are losing confidence that they'll ever see that money. And I'll cite just two examples. The city of Tracy was awarded $41 million for a key infrastructure grant that would create good-paying jobs, but now they may never see that money. The Los Angeles rail corridor that connects San Diego to Los Angeles to San Luis Obispo. I know y'all love that part of the California coastline. The Los Angeles rail corridor was promised $27 million to help improve service along that route. And now that's in jeopardy. And I know this one well. This corridor, great plans in the works, not just for efficiency, improved service, but improved safety. Imagine that, improving safety of rail lines in America. But no, y'all are okay with stopping that work. Now, although President Trump has threatened to block hundreds of billions of dollars to support families recovering from catastrophic fires, law enforcement agencies that we rely on to keep safe, and the children and families who depend on federal child care and nutrition programs, that's what they're doing. Now, I know some of you have said, well, that order's been frozen, so we shouldn't worry. Technically, the OMB funding freeze order has been halted by the courts, not by choice, by the courts. For now, we know that the fight is far from over. This is just their first attempt in this administration, not their final attempt. And we know it because this is exactly what President Trump and Russell Vought want, a constitutional crisis to give the president more power and to make way for those billionaire tax breaks that you guys are so hell-bent on. That's their plan for our families, for our Constitution, for our country. Here's another tool that they have. They will use immigration and other culture wars to divide us. Because if we are fighting amongst ourselves, Trump and his ultra-wealthy friends will just be helping themselves to tax breaks. They'll try to overwhelm the system to enrich themselves, whether it's legal or not. because they're banking on us being distracted by culture wars. In fact, look at just how much has been struck down by federal judges appointed by both Democrats and Republicans. This isn't a partisan deal. How much has been struck down already, just weeks into this administration? One judge has already enjoined President Trump's blatantly unconstitutional executive order on birthright citizenship. Not one, but two judges have enjoined the OMB spending freeze. Two federal judges also enjoined his executive order on transgender prison inmates. And that's just in the last week. Multiple suits have also been brought challenging his illegal purge of the federal workforce and his attempts to interfere with USAID. So we know that President Trump and his billionaire friends are only in it for themselves. That's been well established. They've shown us exactly who they are for years now. But colleagues, I have to admit that what surprises me most is that when I hear from my Republican colleagues one-on-one that, well, we agree on more than you think. Let's just keep talking. Let's work to try to find this common ground. Let's do what's right for our country. Call me an optimist, but I'll believe my Republican colleagues when they say that they came to Washington to help their constituents. Now, while I disagree with it, I understand that some of our colleagues are choosing to make political decisions with some of President Trump's nominees. You may be thinking about a potential re-election in 2026. Maybe you think it's just easier to stand up to Trump on an issue somewhere further down the road than right now. But here's what surprises me. What's different with Russell Vought is that this is a nominee who embodies a larger vision about the presidency and about the country that would fundamentally hurt your constituents too. Not just our constituents, not just my constituents, all of our constituents. And it already has. This short-lived OMB funding freeze alone gave us a look at just some of the backlash from cutting a widely popular social safety net. So to my Republican colleagues, respectfully, I know you're getting the same calls as I am. I know you're hearing about the constituents whose lives will be made harder because of this. I know you're not blind to the real-world effects of Donald Trump and Russell Vought. This week, I've had Californians come out in droves to my office, encouraging me to oppose this nomination. They are demanding the services that they rely on to be protected, and they're refusing to let Russell Vought pillage programs like Head Start, like Meals on Wheels, like so many others, just so that the wealthiest Americans can get a bigger tax break. So today, I will end with this, a question to my colleagues across the aisle. Who are you more loyal to? Your own constituents or a reckless president? What are we doing in Washington if we're afraid to stand up for our states and for our constituents? Did any of you run for Senate to cut veterans' housing assistance? Did any of you run for Senate to slash school lunch programs and force kids to go hungry? Did any of you run for Senate to make it harder for communities to get support after a natural disaster and rebuild their home, to rebuild communities. I may sound crazy when I suggest this, but I don't believe it is any political risk at all to stand up for your constituents. And even if you hesitate to speak out publicly against Trump's unprecedented power grab, at least join me in voting against Russell Vought and his dangerous worldview. Don't let Trump's allegiance to billionaires crush your hardworking constituents, because I won't stand for it as he attempts to crush mine. I invite you, I encourage you, I implore you to do the right thing. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.